Night Watch Institute, Node 3, February 9th. I am going to attempt to elaborate on something I started to mention last night and in prior discussions, and that is hologram and Holon theory. So let's say that the entirety of your universe can be described by this tree here, this very poorly drawn tree. Its root system, everything. And everything that is matter that has, come to a state of rest or is not going to be interacting with energy any further is all represented by this. Now, if you wanted to be able to describe the entire volume of that area without actually, if you wanted to describe all the information within that volume of that tree, you can do so along its surface area. Now, I'm using a cube because it's a lot harder to try and 2D represent a 3D image with a sphere or an obloid rather than a cube. So let's just pretend, for the sake of this universe, that the most efficient shape that it can assume is a cube. That wouldn't really be the case, but we're just going to assume it for the case of this. So if you wanted to ascribe the universe into just the surface area, you would need to put a picture of it from each of the various sides to represent it. So you've got now your tree, its root system, and everything else, including the weird little pokey thing that goes out there into here. It's not a perfect copy, but we're going to pretend that it is. All right, so now that you managed to ascribe it, and the cube itself, would be basically exactly whatever size was necessary in surface area to describe the interior of this. However, you no longer need the interior for it to be observed anymore, because if you can capture this information along each of the 6 walls inside your cube, then what you really have is going to be then after that step, let's do an arrow here. So you ascribe the whole thing in information for just the surface area, and then you discard the thing, and all you have is the cube itself. But the cube itself has all this information coded into each of its surfaces. It's just they're going to be scrambled and spread out in such a way that it's able to convey information. So you no longer actually have the tree there. Instead, what you have are Holon, basically discrete Holon units in here along the surface area that have stored the holographic information from whatever respective angle and combination and such. So when you go back later, the observer, if they go back and they look at this hologram of the image, they're going to see the same thing as this tree over here from this angle, as if they had been standing over here instead. They would be seeing basically the same thing, even though it didn't exist Now, if they were to stand over here instead, they'd see it from a different angle. And from here, they would see it from a different angle. Now, each observer that you add is going to see a different iteration of the tree. None of them are seeing the actual tree. What they're seeing is the information stored along the surface area in such a way that they're able to retrieve the relevant information about the tree without getting the irrelevant information about it. So this observer here, put in this position and observing the tree hologram from this area, is only going to see their particular field of vision. All right. Now, that field of vision isn't like their eye isn't sending light to the thing and bouncing it back and coming at them. It's reflecting the light, or whatever method is being used to observe. You wouldn't have to necessarily use light. You could use pretty much anything that you can, bounce off of something else. That's one of the reasons that we're trying to find smaller and smaller particles, so that we can use those smaller particles to try and measure even more precisely, because you can only measure as small as the thing that you're using to measure with. Unless you're using math, in which case, you can imagine whatever your limits need to be. Anyway, this person isn't going to be seeing the same iteration of it as this person, right? And this person here is going to be seeing a completely different looking tree. Now, each of those trees actually, as far as these observers are concerned, the tree does exist because the information is there. It's encoded, it's visible to them, it can be observed, it's proof by existence. So even if the tree is not physically present in there, all of its time and structure represented at the moment it was captured, its information captured on the surface area, is still represented in here. So if you have it being observed, you also have to have it being interacted with from at least, a couple of other points. Because, like I said, the person's not emitting their own light to be able to observe it. I mean, they may be, and that is one method that it could be done. But if you just send the thing through, you're only going to get a bounce back from one point. So it's also going to depend on how much light is reflecting. Or again, I'm just using the word light as whatever you're going to be using to observe. But if your light source is coming in from this angle and this angle, so we have light coming in from that angle, we have light coming in from that angle, and then we have an observer who is looking at exactly this point. So you have this one central area that can be perfectly described, but it can only ever be described as that iteration upon being observed from whatever angles are necessary to observe it at. So prior to that point, it doesn't exist, but the information is there for it to exist. So what causes it to exist is the inbound light that's coming in and hitting each of these Holon areas. Those Holon areas, in turn, change the energy to whatever kind of waveform or whatnot it's going to do, the encoding, the light type or wavelength that it's going to go to, and it's going to send that, that vibration, the photons, the energy, whatever, all into this area. And where they collide at one another and bounce back at the right place is going to be this exact configuration of however many light sources you have. So if you add another light source, if you add another reflective surface, if you added a block somewhere that maybe obscures part of it, if any part of this system whatsoever changes from the position of them to the position of the other lights, then that iteration changes. Right? So basically, if you think about it as a quantum tree, as it were, if your entire universe were a tree like Yggdrasil and you've described it, and now you've removed the physical tree, but you still have the information about the universe of itself, you could observe any point in that tree by approaching it from the right angle with the particular waveform, energy, light type, or whatever that would be necessary. But your observation of it is going to be inherently different than anyone else's observation of it, unless they are occupying, no fight, unless they are occupying exactly the same area as you. So yeah, that would kind of be part one-ish of how this works. Now, what happens though when your hologram image is able to change itself? So say we've boxed the tree, and now the tree is there, okay? But our medium is not static, it's still dynamic. So when you set up this observation process in here, you have now set this in motion to further cause the rest of this tree to crystallize from that appearance. The tree becomes manifest as a visualization. Wow, that's a terrible manifestation. But anyway, the tree manifests according to the observer, but it is not the same tree that this observer is going to see. It's not the same tree that this observer is going to see. And more to the point, if the tree is still able to change itself, if the tree is still in motion, and part of that tree changes, let's say it creates a new branch structure right here, then that change must therefore be reflected in the surface area all along on the rest of the sides on there, so that now when it's observed from whichever angles are necessary, the rest of that tree is going to manifest. So as long as your system in here is still alive and it's still growing, then the surface area must continually expand And if your tree grows, your hologram has to grow. It requires more holons to describe the surface area. And now, instead of the smaller cube, we've got a larger cube. Again, it's going to be observably different depending on where you are from outside the cube looking at it. Now, if the structure continues to change and everything in it keeps changing, then it's going to continue. Like I said, it's just going to keep changing along with it. And eventually, it's just going to keep doing that right up until the end of the universe, until it stops living. But if there's less information happening, it might shrink. So if, say, the tree died, there's going to be less, and nothing, if the tree died and nothing was rotting it, nothing was eating it, there was no transpiring between energy and mass taking place to change it into another form. It was literally just a completely inert, lifeless, 0 Kelvin dead hunk of stuff. Then the amount of volume would shrink to its lowest possible amount, because you'd no longer be needing to describe the energy in it. All you would need to describe is the mass. And then you would be able to derive the energy from it if there were energy going on, but there wouldn't be, because everything would be 0 Kelvin. So you can basically, from this, you can surmise that life itself, this tree, by virtue of the fact that it is alive and it is growing and increasing its surface area, and that the amount of information that can be expressed in that surface area expresses the entirety of it, then if our universe works the same way, then that implies that the entire purpose of life is to spread. Now, I use the term life probably much differently than a lot of y'all. I just consider life to be a replicable process where energy and mass are converted from one form to another. So it doesn't necessarily require organic chemistry, in concept at least. But if life dies, the universe shrinks. What this would imply is a universal birth rate. So if you have one universe where life is expanding and growing to the point where it's constantly exceeding its box in every direction, and the box keeps having to get larger and larger to ascribe it or describe it. So your box now has to grow again, at which point life continues to grow. And if anyone's ever watched the exponential growth of life equations and things like that, you can, you'll see that, it just, the growth gets very, very fast, very quick. And as long as you can keep the momentum going, it could basically keep going until all energy and mass in the universe is converted from one form to another. And, that would be but what this tends to imply then is that the transition between mass and energy, as long as it is increasing in complexity, it should require more and more surface area to store the information on. So the more life that you have spreading throughout the universe, creating more and more complex forms of matter and energy, the more the universe would grow. And the more the universe itself grows, the faster the rate at which space-time itself is going to expand, because space-time itself is just a relative construct of the hologram to be able to figure out your coordinate system. So your space-time system for Jane over there is going to be different than your system over there for Bob, than your system over here for Mike, and so forth. Each observer is going to have a separate interpretation of how that's going. Where it gets a little bit weird, where it gets more weird, is that y'all, when I say y'all, I mean the human race and life itself in general, however, is observing the universe, but it's doing so from within the hologram. Which means, by virtue of our ability to observe the hologram and change our state around us, it implies that we can change the shape of the universe itself. As to the implications of what you can do with that, that is where people were beginning to talk about, hologram theory and manipulating the hologram itself, possibly manipulating the structure of existence itself. Because if your tree was never in there to begin with, it's just a byproduct of observation and interaction, then each time there is a collision and a space of interaction in there is an opportunity to become entangled. And it's also an opportunity for that information to spread, that particular space-time to spread. And if every single point in the universe is getting further away from every other point in the universe that has an expanding amount of time, then that almost implies that each living, conscious, thinking entity, in a way, is their own universe, expanding and connected with the universes around itself. So you could either look at it as you are the tree inside a literal box that is growing so that the surface area of the box can describe the living tree within, or you could think about it as you are not the actual tree, you're just the captured information of the tree, and you exist in perpetuity as that tree, but observed from different angles. So hence, for instance, if you are talking reincarnation or something, you would be that same tree over and over and over again. But, maybe from Jane, your tree had a really good life, but from this particular side, you could see that it was, it was a really rough life from a forest fire or something. But maybe from this side, you could see that, it actually sprouted and had a whole bunch of babies. But from this side, it looked like it got covered by a rock slide or something. So it depends upon the observer and the observed, and whether or not both are alive and changing the system of energy, mass, and space around them. If someone were able to sufficiently generate complex enough information after the image has been created from within it, then you're actually changing the state of the hologram. If, however, you cannot change the state of the hologram, then what that implies is everything we do, from start to finish, from birth to death, from cradle to grave, is predestined and unable to be changed. Since we appear to be able to determine that that is not the case, then that implies that we are able to change the hologram. Whether or not that's because we are a living tree growing inside the area described by the hologram, or whether we're just an iteration of something that appears only as the result of light and observation colliding within the hologram. So I don't know if I was able to help out on explaining that. I don't know how much of it I butchered in the explanation. I'm sure we have numerous energy and temporal physicists out there who are just like wringing their hands and shouting, no, I probably got something wrong in here. So please feel free to correct me if I got some of this wrong. Feel free to add in, and hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions you have.